Unscripted, unfiltered, unapologetic. Diner stops and real talk. The voice of farmers, not politicians or promise makers. Just honest conversation about agriculture's biggest issues. At the table today. This is The Farmer's Table, an original series from Pivot Bio.
Hi, I'm Andrew McCrea, host of the American Countryside and a farmer in Northwest Missouri. We welcome you back for another episode of The Farmer's Table, the place where farmers gather to have their say on the most important issues of the day. Today, we're going to get a fresh perspective on agriculture direct from the next generation. We have three young farmers joining me at the table. Gavin Spoor from Martinsburg, Missouri, and two from Kentucky, Grayce Emmick of Lewisport and Quint Pottinger from New Haven. The newest generation of farmers are coming into the business at a time of unprecedented change, from technological breakthroughs to dealing with day-to-day business decisions. These farmers really know what they like, and more importantly, what they don't like.
I feel like an old farmer being around this table. You guys are young farmers, but tell me, how long have you, in a sense, been farming in your family? Because you're a brand new farmer, right?
Yeah, first generation. My first crop was 2017, but I worked for guys through high school and have been around farming when I was a young kid.
Why did you get started in farming?
I'm crazy. I've loved farming since I was a little kid, but didn't know if I'd be able to make it happen in real life, and started small in 2017 when I was in college, and it's grown ever since.
But for the two of you, you grew up in farming? Did you take over for your family, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so I'm eighth generation, a little bit different than first, but I started farming for myself in 2016, I believe. But I've been around the farm since I was born. I've been coming to the farm with my dad, so, but in 2016 is when I started for myself.
Yeah, and you've been in farming for a while too, your family?
Yeah, my family settled the area we're in 1788. 8 square miles was the tract that was given after we won the Revolutionary War, and it was never passed down. It was, if you want to farm, buy a piece of land, you could buy it off the family, buy it from somebody and start farming. So I started in 2012. I actually bought the last 80 acres of that original tract from my grandmother. And then my dad, he was farming on his own, and we merged our farms in 2018. So 2012 was the first year I started farming, and corn made 8 bushels an acre.
What do you think's the hardest thing to do to get started?
I originally thought it would be land, but I've gotten good at finding the small patches and the nooks and crannies that everyone else overlooks. So it hasn't been land as much as capital. Farming is so capital intensive, the equipment, the fertilizer, the seed, there's some big dollars. So just finding the access to the capital to continue to expand.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, it's not, access to capital is one thing, finding the person to give you the money, but when you start farming and you don't have that fixed asset already in place, and you have to add that variable cost on top of it, you're doubling your cost of production, and it takes 10, 15 years to get that under control before you can start growing. And the other thing, you're growing rapidly, and so you can never manage financially with any lender marginal growth that's sustainable, because you have to scale up to get your cost efficiencies and your fixed costs of your equipment. And it's hard to get lenders to understand that.
From a completely different perspective as far as capital goes, leading in as a new generation on a generational farm, I think the hardest thing is the communication with the past generations and trying to implement new practices. I got lucky, my dad's very open-minded, but I know a lot of people struggle with that, and every once in a while my dad and I will have our little fits, but.
Well, what did you try to implement that didn't go so well?
It's just not anything huge, just like different ways to fix things as far as like mechanical stuff goes, because he's been doing it a lot longer than I have, and most of the time he's right, but every once in a while.
I'm starting to understand this because I've got a decade in me now, and I know how hard it was to get through certain seasons on the farm, and now I understand why some farmers get in a way that they are, because it's worked for them, and they may have tested something else and it didn't work, and they see us going down that same path. They're like, don't do that because you'll end up here. I mean, my dad was lucky enough to get through the 80s, and he spent all the 90s and the early 2000s going through 1 or 2 bad seasons in the early 80s. And so to work with somebody, have somebody like that in my farm, it's neat because we can bounce ideas off of them. But if it's multi-generational and you're under the generation that comes before you, you have to work through that. And you almost don't get the opportunity to fail, which is important sometimes in business. So you don't know what you don't know, and you can't know it until you learn it, kind of thing.
Sure. I mean, I lean heavily on some local farmers, and I'm always asking them for advice. So I can go to 5 or 6 different guys, and I could piece advice together and take it back home and make it what I want on my farm, where I'm not stuck to just asking Dad or Grandpa.
Yeah.
So that's nice being able to go get multiple different opinions. I started really small. I mean, my first operating note was not that large, and I just had a few acres, but I proved that I could pay it back and work on my business skills and grow a little bit every year. And my local bank has been behind me, I mean, every single year. And there's lots of dollars changing hands now, and they're still backing me because we started small. I don't think a bank should give any 18-year-old kid $1 million and say, hey, go plant these thousands of acres, but start small, prove you can do it, and expand. And yeah, I've got a really good relationship with them and been growing with me ever since I started.
Yeah, you're right. It's not about farming. I mean, if you take the start farming out of it, start a business, it's the same thing. I mean, how many people start a business and they're out of business in 6 months or a year? In a business, aside from ag, you can test things multiple times. You could test an idea 40 times in a year. In farming, you get 40 chances to perfect a system. And so the grit, maybe just a little bit more, the capital is intense starting up. And so that forces you to innovate, to create something that's special about what you're doing and not just growing a commodity. Because you won't perfect it as a new farmer. You don't have enough time to. You get 40 crops, hopefully, before you either retire or God retires you. And so you have to find a way to get in and get gritty.
I don't have a wife yet or kids or a huge house. I can live pretty cheap. So if I want to start a farm, now's the time to do that. I can't. This dream wouldn't be the same if I was 40. Because I've got multiple kids that I have to worry about how they're going to eat. I just can't do that. But I mean, I can live off of ramen noodles. So.
Ramen noodles and bologna sandwiches.
Yeah.
Farmers have always taken care of what they value. They cultivated bountiful land and fed a nation hungry for progress. As Americans dialed up, precision on the farm led to yields once thought impossible. But when it came to nitrogen, it wasn't precise or predictable enough. Farmers deserve a nitrogen worthy of who they are and what their land can provide. And now there is one.
Well, talk about lifestyle. Is your lifestyle farming different than the generation before you?
Absolutely.
How?
Well, I mean, before you were married to it. I mean, farming in the last generation, you grew a crop not to sell it on the market. You grew a crop to feed the cattle, to sell onto the market. And farming was more in the family or in the business diversified, per se. It's not like that anymore. I mean, you said you don't have kids. We've been married 10 years. We don't have kids because we're both building a business, and that takes a lot of time. The business is our child. We get to a point where we're more stable, where we can afford to do that. It can happen.
So my family, we just do corn and soybeans now, but my dad, he used to do tobacco, so he used to raise tobacco, which is very labor intensive, and he also used to run a feedlot. So he was pretty much married to it. And me now, we don't have cattle anymore, we don't have tobacco anymore, and it gives me a lot of freedom to be able to do stuff like this.
Well, how much of that choice is because you want the freedom versus, okay, that just makes the most economic sense? Do you think young farmers are choosing to be, put in quotes, just crop farmers, so I've got more free time, let's say in the winter?
I think it's possible.
All my farming buddies, the dudes I looked up to when I was a kid, they just row crop. They might have a couple cattle, but it wasn't a huge part of their operation. So I grew up just wanting to be a row crop farmer because I wasn't introduced to the livestock aspect. I worked for hog farmers in high school, and I realized you're married to that every day. I like to be able to, go travel if I want to, come to things like this, or take off on a weekend, or go sell popcorn. And if I'm stuck feeding livestock all day, I couldn't do that.
Do you think people are shying away from livestock?
All of a sudden, when the millennial generation was getting through college and the financial crisis happened, they didn't have a good job option, but hey, the farm's making money. Maybe there's some money in ag this way. Livestock's got a problem. It's hard to attract young talent to be committed to something like that if they know they can't make money doing it. And they're looking at the generation before them that's in livestock, and they're doing the same thing they were doing 20 years ago, digging themselves out of a hole. And so until that model changes, until they can find some other way to leverage something that either it's a niche or the industry changes to attract more young people in it, I think that's the key core part of the problem. I think people would be okay spending a lot of time doing something so long as they know that their well-being is going to be taken care of. They're going to be better off in 10 years than where they are today.
Is it harder to break into farming as a female young farmer than a male, or maybe you don't know any different?
Well, growing up, my family was very supportive. So I wasn't really aware of, I didn't really think it was weird that a female was on the farm until I started to get on social media, because that's when people started saying stuff, because my dad and my granddad and my whole family was really supportive of me, and they didn't make it feel like it was this big thing that a female was on the farm, because it was normal for us.
I've got to watch this from the sideline. Just a week or two ago, Grayce was in Missouri, and we went to my niece's basketball game, and there was this young girl that came up to Grayce and said, "Hey, can I please get a picture with you? I watch your YouTube videos. It's really inspiring," of her just doing work on the farm. It was so cool to see that happen and watch that from the sidelines. She's inspiring a whole generation of young women.
What advice do you give to a new farmer?
Manage your cost.
Yeah.
Manage your cost. And when you've got done managing your cost, manage your cost. You have your cost efficiencies have got to be so on point, because if you don't make a profit, if you don't break even, you won't farm next year, especially if you're starting out. The older guys, they can weather through it. They've got land that they can spread some losses out on. We can't afford to do that.
Yep. Yeah, you can hide costs really well if you've got paid for ground. You can stomach a loss or take a loan against the ground that you've got equity built into. But as a young guy, I mean, you were running thin. Build a budget. It sounds so simple, but build a budget. Break the budget out. Figure out where your pennies are going, because you need to watch, I mean, not just your dollars, but your pennies. Can I shave $10 a month here on this? You just have to know where every dollar's going.
Don't be afraid to take risks. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you're probably going to make a lot. And don't be afraid to ask questions. It's all about learning. It's the only way to get better.
What would cause you to get out of this business that you've now been in for a while?
I mean, there's a lot of long work days in the spring and fall, but I enjoy going out to that piece of equipment and getting to spend some time in the field. But watching that crop go through the year, seeing that seed turn into a plant and that plant turn into a food that I can then sell directly to the consumer, and people's faces light up when they pop popcorn that I grew and they tell me how much, how good it tastes, I love that. And I don't see any reason I would ever step away from doing that.
Oh, I'm never going to leave. It's just
Because?
as simple as that. I just love it so much. I've had a passion for it ever since I was really young, so I really just enjoy it, and I think it's fun. And I mean, it provides for me, so.
As far as leaving, it'd take a whole lot of money or some other external force to convince me that leaving would be the best decision, because this lifestyle is unmatched.
No doubt these three farmers are passionate about agriculture, all planning to make it their life's work. From where I sit, I think the future looks pretty bright. We want to thank Gavin, Grayce, and Quint for their candid and honest observations. We'll see you next time on The Farmer's Table.